And now we're starting the second part about variables, where we go into details about them. In the first part, we stopped at numerical variables. Now we are going to use a practical example of using variables. Let's start with placement of an object. But before that, we need to understand what is geometry in Unreal Engine. Geometry, that is BSP brushes, are basic blocks with which we can easily manipulate. It's most commonly used for creating rooms. The simplest example of the benefit can be demonstrated as follows. Put geometric cube on a level, put another geometric cube almost inside of another, and change brush type from additive to subtractive, which means that this brush will absorb the other one while being invisible. The result is obvious. You can move subtractive brush to any place you want and it will absorb anything that is additive. And we definitely need to select both of these objects. You can do it by holding Ctrl and pressing left mouse button on these objects. There are often questions from beginners, something like, why my level became so laggy? This is usually the result of that BSP brushes use a lot of resources of PC and it's necessary to convert them into static meshes for optimization, as shown in the video. By selecting objects, press Create Static Mesh button. Name it whatever you want and choose a folder. Now you have the whole mesh with which you can do whatever and however you want to. Move up the geometry cube and increase the size of the cube in all axes except Z. But I do it to make it quickly and the result is obvious. Just look how much lateral faces of the cube are stretched, which is completely wrong. In your projects, be sure to increase the size not with this common way, but with using brush settings, like here. Now look, there is no more stretching, and it's very good because the material by which we cover the mesh won't be ugly stretched. Copy-paste the same cube. You can do it with usual methods that are shown on the screen, or simply by holding Alt, move our object on the right axis and new object will appear. Now make a hole in the cube. We'll find out why soon. Duplicate objects like it was already shown with hotkeys. It's better to select more objects for duplication so you could create more of them. Create a blueprint of actor. Open this blueprint. Change the material of this object so we could understand that exactly this object have to move. Create a variable of x-axis, because we're going to move the object on the axis x. Create a math operator. If you want to know more about operators in Unreal Engine, just open the chapter of Unreal Engine Encyclopedia about operators. Create a math operator add. Add set to this variable. In the first video about variables, I explained what it is. Add event tick. It's an event called every frame, but you can make it working once per second, and we make it so in the future. Create the node add local offset, which move any object, in this case floor, split vector. Now you can connect float, which we discussed earlier. Connect data pin to X so the location will change. Initially here is 0, but if you change it to 1, then event tick will work once per second, not per frame. If you put here 5, then the event will be called each 5 seconds. But turns out it moves too slowly. So let's make it called per frame. So that means we need to type 0. And now these cubes fall, because their physics and gravitation are turned on. Now we can connect execution pin to the new nodes, and another events will be called per frame or per 1 or a few seconds. Now get more practice with theory. Create a keyboard event, connect it to flip-flop. Flip-flop is a macro and flow control which switches alternately between the first node and the second node, without any limit. Now add a node set actor location. With the help of this node, we can teleport. This time we won't split data pin. We'll just use a variable vector instead. Here we can put numerical variables on x, y, z for location. And you can even do it without using any variables like vector, just by putting numbers in this function. But sometimes you need to use vector, for example, when a few nodes use the same number or vector constantly change. As has been mentioned before, flip-flop is a macro and flow control which switches alternately between the first node and the second node. You can add more flip-flop and it will work too. If you want to know more about flip-flop, open the chapter about flip-flop in Unreal Engine Encyclopedia. And what means rotator is obvious. You just change rotation of an object here. For using it, you're going to have a function which can change a value of rotator. And now the last variable in this video, it's transform. This variable includes the value of location, which means that transform includes variable vector. Also transform includes rotation, which means transform includes rotator. Also, transform has individual values for scale. Scale controls the size of objects. Let's try to make our character bigger. Add a keyboard event. Add a relevant node for changing vector. Connect the variable transform and change the value. Let's increase our cells in 4 times. Put the number 4. Right now we have the usual size, but when we press the button, we become 4 times bigger. It's very simple and easy to use such blueprints in our projects. For example, player drinks a portion and becomes 2 times bigger, or becomes 2 times smaller. Only instead of the keyboard event will happen another event. This allows you to move, rotate and scale with the help of this cool variable transform. We learned next things during this video. Thank you for your attention and until third part about variables in Unreal Engine Encyclopedia.